everyone. In this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at another chess tactic, and this is about trapping pieces. Now, I don't exactly consider this a chess tactic, but it's a good skill that you need to know in case you ever want to surprise your opponents and just win material just easily. So let's look at how this can be used in a real-life game. So white goes e4, black goes g6, and now white goes for the move d4. And this is the modern defense, and so far it's going all according to plan. Bishop g7, knight f3, d6, bishop c4. And here, black makes a serious inaccuracy. Black should instead just develop the knight to f6 or go c6. Just continue development and keep this bishop as active as possible, meaning don't block it with any moves. However, that's exactly what black does. They go for knight to d7. The bishop's power is now nullified, and it's no longer controlling the critical e6 square. And you'll see how this square is the key square of the entire game. White will now play the very nice tactical sequence bishop f7 check, king f7, and now knight g5 check. And here, the king is in some serious trouble, because if you go over to f6, then you get checkmated on queen f3. And if you go to f8, then just knight e6 check, and there's a fork on the king and the queen. So black is going to lose material. However, there is one square where you can go to, which is e8. And it seems like black is safe now. But white can just play knight e6. And would you look at that? The queen on d8 is now trapped. And the queen has nowhere to go, and you have no way of actually removing this knight on e6. So black is just losing here, and nothing for him to do. Let's look at a couple more examples. In this next example of trapping pieces, we're going to see how being greedy can usually be the result of trapping your enemy's pieces. So white goes e4, and black now plays the move c6, so we get a Caro-Kann defense. White goes d4, black goes d5, and now we have e5. So this is the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann. After e5, black plays the correct move, bishop f5, and here white usually should go for moves like h4 and then g4 to try kicking this bishop away. Even moves like knight f3 are considerable, even c4. Bishop d3 is also a fine move, but it just gets rid of white's advantage. So black trades the bishops off and now goes e6, which is generally what you want to have in the Caro-Kann. Once you exchange your light-squared bishop off, you obviously want to play e6 and cement your pawn structure. And the following moves that white does are actually pretty normal until move 8. So white goes knight e2, and it's move 6. So c5, c3, knight e7, and here white plays a big mistake. They go for the move queen b5 check. And this move itself is not necessarily a mistake, but after queen d7, the next move that white makes is the biggest mistake of the entire game. White should probably trade the queens off, and even though it might favor black technically, it's better than what happens in this case. In this case, white takes on c5. And now how does black trap the queen? It's gone a bit too far from its own side of the board. So, black goes knight f5. You want to go knight f5 because you want to make sure that this queen cannot escape to a3. And the only piece that would actually be guarding that in that case would be this bishop. So, knight f5. And now the queen goes to a5. And it's more specific why you have to go knight f5. You could also go knight g6, but you should perhaps stay away from playing this move knight c6, as it would block the queen's defense to this b5 square, and then also meaning that white can go queen b5 and escape with the queen to d3. So knight f5 is best to be played. And here, white only has one move with the queen, and that is going to a5. And here, black can actually trap the queen by going b6. And after this, the queen has simply nowhere to go. Best move is probably to play queen to a3, and you must give up your queen for the bishop on f8. And after this, white's hopes of anything are just crushed. So that was the first example. Let's look at one more example where it can occur in a game. In this example, we're going to be seeing how, yet again, being greedy can always result in getting a piece trapped. So white will go d4, black will go d5. And this is actually a very common variation in the Queen's Gambit accepted. So c4, dc4, All of this is correct. You can actually accept the pawn, but you have to be willing to give it back up later on in the game. So white goes e3, black now goes for b5. And this is not necessarily a move you want to see as black, because yes, you are trying to keep on to your pawn, but it's not the best idea considering that you're just losing a lot of time in development. And white now plays a4 and is trying to strike on the queen side. And yet again, best is probably play something like b4, give up this c4 pawn, and then continue development. But black doesn't do that. Black plays the biggest mistake of the game, and that's c6. After c6, a takes b5. So white trades a pair of pawns, and you might be thinking, how does this work? I mean, white's just going to be down a pawn. Well, that's true, but after a takes b5, this pawn is a poison pawn. You do not want to be capturing it, otherwise you're just going to lose the game. How? Well, it turns out if you play c takes b5, then white can actually go queen to f3. It turns out, if this position is reached, you should probably just play knight f6 and be willing to give up that pawn. I mean, it's better than losing a lot of more material. So c takes b5, black tries to keep on to the material, but white now goes queen to f3. And either this rook on a8 is going to be lost, if not this knight, or even this bishop. Because the rook is attacked, and it's also trapped on the a8 square. So you have to save the rook by means of going either knight c6 or bishop to b7. In either case, you're losing a piece, and after that, white is just completely winning. After something like queen a6, they can easily consolidate the position and just develop their own pieces and win the game quite easily. So that was another example of trapping pieces. Let's look at one more case. In this last example we're seeing of trapped pieces, we notice that white actually is down in exchange. They have a bishop against a rook. However, white is actually up 2 pawns, and this would technically be considered equal material. But white's not just trying to be equal in this position, they're trying to be better than black. So here, white is going to play the move bishop f6, and this tries to attack both the rook on d8 and also the knight on d4. And this is because if the rook moves from the defense of the knight, then obviously you lose the knight because there's no other piece guarding the knight. So that means that black either needs to keep the defense of the rook to the knight, or black must give up some material. So rook d6. The best move is actually to go knight e6, which would actually give up the exchange back, but you would be down 2 pawns as black, so you would still technically be losing. Here, if you play bishop takes e6, then rook d6, and black has chances since one of these 2 bishops are actually going to be falling. So white can really choose which bishop he wants to give up. In any case, black has chances of surviving, mainly because white actually has compensation for the exchange. Now, the correct move is actually just to play bishop d8, and after knight d8, black is just down 2 pawns, and this is an easy victory for white. So that means that knight e6 would have been the best option, but black goes rook d6, trying to save the rook this way. However, after this rook d6 move is played, white goes for bishop e7. And they're attacking this rook on d6. They're also basically trapping it on the d6 square. You can't go to d7, d8, e6, f6, or d5. All of those squares are covered. Best is for black to go rook e6 and hope that if white is going to capture this rook on e6, black can take with the knight, and maybe black still has a couple of chances, although those are very slight. Black is most likely going to lose the game, but black still has chances of getting some counterplay. However, white is not just going to immediately take the rook. Instead, they're going to go bishop c5 check, and after the king moves, say to a6, white will just take the knight on d4. And after bishop takes d4, all of black's chances of actually trying to win have been diminished. So now let's look at how we can trap pieces in our puzzles that we're going to be looking at. In this first puzzle, we see that both sides are completely equal when it comes to material. However, black's queen has wandered a tad bit too far into white's camp. So how does white take advantage of the very misplaced queen in white's king side? Okay, so rook to d2 is the correct move. How is it rook to d2? Well, it turns out that now this queen has nowhere to move where it can protect itself. So best is to either take the rook on d2 or play queen c4. In either case, you have to give up the queen for a rook, meaning that you're going to be down material and you're just losing here if you're playing with the black pieces. Note that you cannot go rook f to d8 or rook a to d8 because after this, white can simply just play the move rook takes e2, and after rook takes d6, e takes d6, white is simply up a whole rook, and there's no way that black can survive after this. So, that was the first puzzle. Let's look at the next one. In this next puzzle, we see that white's rook has ventured a tad bit too deep into black's position. Now, white has not had any of the other pieces activated. Not the knight on f3, not the bishop on e1. So how is black going to take advantage of this unfortunate position that white has? Okay, so black is actually just going to play king to f8. And it's a simple move because the rook on e7 has nowhere to go other than to e6. Now, after the rook goes to e6, you repeat the pattern. Go king to f7. Follow the rook and attack it diagonally. After this king f7 move is played, white has no way of really defending the rook because this knight cannot infiltrate to g5 or to d4. So you're kind of forced to play this rook takes a6 move. However, after this move, black can just take the rook on a6, and black is simply up the exchange, and they have no hard way of actually converting this position. So that was the second puzzle. Let's look at the last one. In this last puzzle, it's actually white to play. And in this specific case, white has a very active rook, and they also have a very active knight. And the only active piece that black actually has is the bishop on c3. And if you also notice, this rook on c7 is actually trapped. If it was black to move, black's best bet would to be actually play b5 and sacrifice the pawn so they can free up a bit of space for their rook to run to. However, it's white to move in this case, and what is white going to do that will easily take advantage of the position? Okay, so what white's going to do is white's actually just going to go knight d6. And it's as simple as that. White places the knight on d6 because the rook is simply trapped. If you were to take the knight on d6 with e takes, then c takes d6, and the rook is going to be captured. Unfortunately for black, you cannot counterattack this rook on d8 with bishop f6, because white can simply capture the rook on c7, and white has no problem. If you capture the rook on d8, then after c takes d8 queen, white is just completely winning. So bishop f6 doesn't work. So what happens if black plays another move, like bishop to e5, for instance, trying to now play ed6, cd6, and then just capture the pawn on d6 to get rid of that pawn which was giving the rook on c7 a lot of trouble? Well, here, white can just go knight e8 check, and after something like king h6, knight c7, bishop c7, just rook d7. And white's just easily winning since all of these pawns are very loose and can easily be picked off one by one. So now I hope I've made the concept of trapping pieces a lot more clearer for you. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comments section, and stay tuned for more chess.